This is Counterpoint, and I'm your host, Tanya Granick-Allen. One of the most controversial ideologies of the past decade has to be gender ideology. The belief that gender is a social construct and that it isn't linked to one's biological sex has caused much confusion in society. Some argue that any biological male who now identifies as a woman should have access to women's only spaces like bathrooms, shelters, sports, and prisons. Others argue that women's only spaces should be protected and that any encroachment on those spaces by biological men could not only be a safety threat, but also erode women's hard fought rights. This has sparked debates on whether policies meant to protect women's spaces are being weakened in the name of inclusivity. Furthermore, some fear that the increasing focus on gender identity may inadvertently overshadow the unique struggles women face based on their biological sex. In areas like healthcare, legal protections, and even the definition of womanhood, some argue that women's rights are being diluted by the prioritization of gender identity. For example, in the context of healthcare, there are concerns that the needs of biological women, such as access to reproductive services or mammograms, they may be overshadowed in favor of policies designed to be more inclusive of transgender individuals. In light of these concerns, President Donald Trump has rescinded policies of the previous administration, which were seen as an impeding women's rights, and creating new policies and protections for women. International bodies governing sport have also continued down the path of protecting women's only sports, and in some cases, reversing decisions which had previously allowed biological men to compete against women. And what is happening in Canada? How is Canada balancing transgender rights with protections for women's spaces? Have we woken up to the dilemma and, in many cases, consequences when biological men are allowed to enter women's spaces? Well, joining me now to shed light on the issues are Dr. Linda Blade, a sports performance coach, and Heather Mason, founder of Canadian Women's Sex-Based Rights. Dr. Linda, Heather, thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you both on. So maybe we'll start right off the bat with you, Linda. We've had you on a few times discussing women's sports and encroachments that seem to be taking place only generally in women's sports. So could you bring us up to speed on where things stand and perhaps highlight some new policies that may have come to light?
Well, it's a lot going on. Thank you for having me. It's amazing. Donald Trump has right out of the gate, I think it was on February 5, had a executive order on keeping men out of women's sports. And that was highly appreciated by all of us who care about sex-based rights for women and girls. And also recently, just very recently, the president of World Athletics, Lord Sebastian Coe, has said that in the future World Championships, men cannot compete as women, and they're going to go as far as to reinstating the cheek swab exam or like screen, just like a cheek swab like we did during COVID. That could just a once in a lifetime thing if you're competing internationally. If you have an XY chromosome or the SRY gene, which is the active male gene, then you just are not allowed to be in women's sports, which is what we've been asking for all along. That's 100% airtight. And so, yeah, there have been quite a few developments in the U.S., internationally, and here we are in Canada, and I can tell you things aren't getting any better over here.
So what's going on? And we'll get to you, Heather. We're coming up to the break, so we'll get to you after the break. But Coach Blade, I mean, I know we've had movement in Alberta. Premier Danielle Smith
Yes.
was I'd say pretty vocal on this issue. Is she standing alone, or are other provinces going to follow
Yes.
suit? What about our federal government?
The federal government is hopeless. Liberals, their whole stance on women's sex-based rights is just deplorable. There are no protections for female persons in Canada as far as the Liberals are concerned. But yes, in Alberta, we have had the legislation now is on the table. It is being challenged, I think, in the course, but Premier Daniel Smith has said no boys and girls sports and no gender transitioning of underage minors, and parents have a right to know, about the children's transitioning. So there is movement in Alberta, but I mean, honestly, across the board in a lot of sports, and
Right.
many contexts, it's not getting better.
Okay, we'll be right back.